Welcome, everybody. Today will be an expert panel, and we have a wonderful group of statisticians and DSMB experts with us who will discuss embracing a tech-enabling future. I am Jenny Chaplin, and I am the principal and founder of Sapphire Consulting Services. My expertise is in program management, alliance management, and corporate operations. I focus on startups and early-stage companies, helping them sharpen their development plans. I have an extensive background in small biotech as well as large pharma. I am an OccamPoint member. And we are a group of independent consultants, niche experts, and boutique service providers. And one of the greatest advantages of this group is that we can make connections between each other. We facilitate partnerships with companies, and we fill a lot of gaps in drug development. One of the offerings that we have in OccamPoint is the webinars. We showcase startups and small businesses that are pioneering transformative solutions to improve the efficiency of pharmaceutical and medical device development. As a speaker, you would get the opportunity to share information about your products and services. If anyone's interested in becoming a speaker or a sponsor, please contact Julia or me or apply through the website address below. On that note, I would like to thank our sponsors. Julia is the founder and CEO of OccamPoint, and she has extensive experience in pharma leadership roles at a number of large pharma and mid-sized biotech companies.
Professor Alex Kaizer. He is an associate professor of biostatistics and informatics at the University of Colorado on Schultz Medical Campus and a faculty member in the Center for Innovative Design and Analysis. His research focuses on Bayesian methods. He uses that to shape information sharing. It's very important in the context of today's adaptive clinical trial design. He has served as a DSMB chair as well as DSMB trial statistician. Rick is the president and CEO of Telperian. He has been a catalyst for innovation in clinical development, over 25 years of leadership and experience in large pharma, biotech, and startups. As the CEO of Telperian, he's driving next generation solutions that integrate advanced analytics, AI, and precision medicine. I'm very excited to have Corsee on this distinguished panel. She has shaped governance of DSMBs when such things were a novelty. Through Genentech, she chaired the Data Review Board Governance Committee and led global clinical operations and biometrics. She later served as Executive Vice President of Development Operations at Juno Therapeutics and was an advisor to the Celgene Office of the Chief Medical Officer. Corsee now serves on the board of multiple biotech companies. She is also a co-chair of the board of advisors at Fred Hutch. Let me kick off with a general question. What changes in the landscape of clinical trial over the last decade have had the biggest impact on DSMB governance and management?
The first DMC-specific guidance was in March 2006. And also, there was already an NIH policy that's in place for NIH trials. There was also the ICH E6 guideline that mentions monitoring. The regulators, as well as the sponsors, are becoming more mature in the way they look at interim analysis and protecting the integrity of the trial. One of the things is the jump in the regulatory expectations. The first regulation is all recommendation. Maybe you should do this, maybe you should do that. The 2024 guidance is very mandatory. It broadened the scope. It also tries to standardize the DSMB operations, mandating written charters, and very tight wording about the conflict of interest.
So, Alex, what biggest changes have you seen in interim decisions as it applies to multi-arm, multi-drug trials?
One of the biggest challenges in the last decade I've seen with master protocol trials more generally, whether it's a platform trial, a basket trial, or an umbrella trial, is that making a decision can inform what's happening in other sub-studies. And by getting off, people may infer, whether rightly or wrongly, what's going on in other sub-studies. They have to really carefully think through these challenges and how they frame their recommendations to be simpler in a more standard two-arm trial, because it was the one trial you're making a decision for the whole thing. The idea of the master protocol design, especially in oncology, is that it's not the end of the road, actually. We can keep adapting and modifying those trials moving forward. And so we just need to be very cautious of DSMB members, chairs, or sponsors working with DSMB on what information we share. And we're very intentional about the amount or limit to what we can share.
Rick, what have you seen as the biggest shift?
Simply the amount of data information is easy to collect, readily accessible. The guidance that Corsee mentioned does talk about using external data, mostly external data from other trials. Alex was mentioning that it could be trials that have a common mechanism of action. So you could compare that to your patients in your trial. So it's access to data, the ability to clean the data quicker. In most DSMBs I've seen, there's usually the first slide will be, we have 120 patients who have gone through the primary efficacy endpoint. You're going to get to see results from 80 of them, right? Because there's not enough time to clean the data. There's always a delay. And so as tools become more efficient and more effective at cleaning, synthesizing, analyzing data, that 80 to 120 should shrink quickly. The more data you have, the better decisions you'll be able to make.
Going back to the governance, which is very important because it impacts how the interpretation of the data is ultimately carried out.
When I joined Genentech, that's when we set up a structure. If the decision is to accept or not accept, which will affect a huge program, then that decision will be at a higher corporate level. That's why we set up data review board, which is very senior level, who has enough knowledge of the trial, who can make decision on behalf of the company, and who will communicate with the DMC. Once the DMC has already looked at the interim data, they don't communicate anything about that with the team. It's only with the DRB. You do have to have very senior people who are trusted by the company to make those decisions. So we drafted that a little bit before the 2000. We discussed that with the FDA and actually shared it. And they asked me, can we use this template to guide other companies? Another example is you need to stop the trial because of safety reasons. DRB can work with the FDA and say, can you give us this data? I looked at the summary and I noticed the lag in reporting because it's an open label at the site. The sites are reporting deaths in the active arm faster than they were reporting deaths in the control arm. So all we did was say, tell the team, do another sweep. We didn't tell them what was going on. And they did a sweep, came back, all even. And then DSMB restated its recommendation. And the team had no clue what was going on till the very end. And that's the value of a data review board.
And could you comment on the differences between EU and FDA?
The EU doesn't require to have a charter. Interim analysis can differ. Sometimes the FDA is okay with a couple of interim analyses, and the EU is not. So that's where also the nuance about what the role of the DSMB is. Now, I have had experience where the EU, during the review, did ask for the DSMB minutes. So you have to be very careful with the minutes, as truthful as possible. No, but we thought about this, we thought about that.
The biggest thing to remember, like with respect to DSMB, is that the choices they make can either inform other parts of the trial or unblind other parts of the trial. People can connect certain dots, whether that's right or wrong. So that can cascade through multiple things. It may affect the recruitment of patients, providers who are enrolling in the trial. They don't want to put my patient in the trial because I hear it's going to need enrollment or has X, Y, Z problems. I'm going to go to a different trial instead. Natural question, how can we maintain the firewalls? Something being very careful with what information the DSMB is sharing. Something else I've seen in a platform trial with multiple sub-studies. Each sub-study would have its own sort of independent DSMB, which reduces the risk of them potentially contaminating each other.
Is there a central coordinating unit across the arm?
Recommend there is broad oversight for the whole trial to help oversee and guideline communication with the DSMB governing board, which could say we're not trying to unblind data, but we are providing insights. If you make this recommendation, this could imply X, Y, or Z. Are you sure that's how you want to phrase that?
It's even tougher when your DSMB wants to share recommendations with another DSMB, with another company, because they're running a similar trial on a competing drug. But it's something that you have to deal with for the safety of the patients.
Now I want to jump to you, Rick, and have you comment on the differences that you've seen in the DSMB setup between small companies and large biotech.
The companies that we work with don't have statisticians. They don't have a DRB chair. If they're doing an interim analysis or reviewing safety data and they need additional information, that has to go out to a contract research organization, which then takes weeks to get back to make these decisions. From the standpoint of the trial, of determining whether you're going to make a go, no-go decision, changing doses, eliminating a dose, all of this takes much more time for the small companies. When you're in a small company, a lot of times you're running 1-2 trials and your entire company is dependent on answers from these ongoing studies. Making decisions on drug manufacturing for a small company, do you hire people? Do you bring in the regulatory systems to go into submission because you've succeeded in phase 2 and are now planning to succeed in phase 3? Do you begin to CDISC your data, which is a very expensive thing? Sometimes in these DSMBs, the summaries are based on raw data because it takes too much time and money to structure the data for regulatory. And if the drug fails, why would you ever do that? So if you could speed up those processes, you could defer some of those costs, make decisions, and then accelerate the process of producing data. At a small company, every interim analysis is going to trigger either raise in money or you're going to have to cut costs. So these are all things, all decisions that small companies need to make.
That's so true. Every study is a lifeline for the company.
Yeah.
How can analytics help us with managing that flow?
If you have technology that automates the production of outputs or automates the structuring of data or connects you directly to the EDC, then the smaller companies wouldn't have to go out to CROs. It takes fewer resources to be able to structure those data and report out the output. So technology can put the speed that you see at the large pharma companies in the hands of the smaller companies that have limited resources.
Yeah, I know you guys are working on some solutions.
Basically, table automation of no code software to produce tables, listings, and figures. After we produce that, we're working on things to help structure the data quicker and then also explore the data. Right now, we have a tool called Explorer that, as long as your data is structured in some one patient per row, you can visualize it. So the DMCs, instead of getting stacks of CSV files or stack of paper or PDF file, you could actually visualize the data and look at it. And you could say, what if I take this patient out? What happens to the graph? And review if some kind of liver enzyme is supposed to be going up in conjunction with some other enzyme, you could pull that up on that single patient and see if those things are moving in parallel. But then this gets to how much access do you want the DMC to have to be able to play around with that information? As technology evolves, it's going to be easier and easier to access all that data. So then it gets to the governance part. That
The solution that you guys are working on at Telperian, you would present that solution as a platform to a sponsor when they're setting up their DSMB, because DSMB would have access to that platform. They could request things more efficiently.
depending
Yes.
on the governance that you put in place, they could produce it on the spot, giving the subgroup of patients with high liver enzyme measures, and then you can produce it right there on the spot.
It's really important to make the job of the DSMB smoother and easier. Most DSMBs prefer things provided to them. They look at it, they ask questions. Typically, there would be a coordinating center who runs the unblinded results. So that's a good step that the DSMB can use. And that's typically what's done. A data coordinating center is the one that does everything. Once the DSMB makes a recommendation, the sponsor has to be very careful to clarify what data they used. If they use other data, there should be some discussion about it because it wasn't validated. And there may be nuances that are not obvious to the coordinating center and the DSMB.
And a lot of the time, DSMB members might not know what data is available to them and what to ask and what not to ask. Alex, I wonder, as a DSMB statistician and as a chair, what perspective do you have on that issue?
Because it's challenging, because even recently I was serving as the statistician for a trial, and they seeking information on something that was clinically interesting, but had nothing to do with the outcomes or safety measures that were noted in the charter or the SAP or the protocol. And I had to essentially say, we'll make note of this and you can put your DSMB letter, but we're going to see if you actually need that because none of that data has been cleaned, verified, or validated yet. And if I provide it to you, it does not seem necessary for what you're looking at. They didn't understand the nuance of what that data was and where it was in the pipeline. The sponsor wasn't planning to clean that data until the trial had ended because it wasn't any of their primary, secondary, exploratory, or safety outcomes. More commonly, what I've run into is not knowing what data exists. We know, obviously, the outcomes because that's specified in the protocol, or in some cases, blind. In a well-operating DSMB, there would be questions asked to the sponsor and to those who have the coordinating center. Do we have information that we might find correlations there? I definitely lean heavily into trying to reiterate as often as possible with the outcomes, which ones have been validated, cleaned. Another DSMB recently, I was serving as a statistician. We have 60% of enrollment, but there's only 40% have been adjudicated. You actually can't do the interim analysis, which the DSMB was meant to do, because unfortunately it just took longer to adjudicate findings. And so I've taken it on my role to stress what the data is.
It amazed me that DSMB members are tasked with this very complicated thing. Usually they have very limited time. Sponsors are lucky if they spend a week reading the reports. Usually it's the day before. On the sponsor side, we think so much about every data point, how it's collected, the nuances, the biases, and they're just are supposed to absorb all of that in one day, and they're doing it for so many sponsors. Analytics could be such a tremendous savior.
Again, do you want to look at a listing of data, or do you want to look at a graph that has the two treatments colored differently, that you can hover over and see exactly what patient that is? That if you had a certain safety concern, could you click on that patient and dig deeper into that patient and say, is this patient at risk of a lot of things? And I've seen DSMBs, you can see their notes. They've circled the 32nd line in the 5th column and made a little note to the side. But it's hard to even look at those sheets without your eyes blurring. If you could have tools that could do that quickly, then it helps a lot. I did have a question for Corsee. If a DSMB asks for a certain set of data, if you say no, that
request comes through the DRB. The team doesn't know that there's a request. And so what we do, and the DRB is composed of myself as the head of biometrics, the head of clinical, the chief medical officer, the global head of regulatory, and the global head of safety. So first thing is to clarify why they need it. Then my job as the chair was to explain to them. It means that the team has to go to the site because that wasn't cleaned. Just explain the implication and the why. If they insist, then you have to provide it as much as you can with a caveat. When the recommendation comes in, then you have to take that into consideration. I've never had a case where they ask for something and once prompted, if it doesn't really make sense, they didn't go back and say, yeah, we really don't need that, and that they can get that information later once the trial is finished. The job of the DRB is really to clarify. You just make sure that they know what they're asking.
One thing that I do want to make sure we cover in the panel before we transition to questions is the skill sets. What are the new skill sets in today's environment that we all should have to make sure that we are going with times?
I think there's a misconception fielding trials are easier, simple, or trivial. They miss all of the nuance of these implications that we've been discussing about the challenges of unblinding, sharing information, rapidly giving information to the DSMB and what is appropriate. If you're not a trialist, they need that education in what a clinical trial is and the operational complexity of trials, because they may have had the fortune in the past of just data magically filling up, not appreciating that there's this rigorous pipeline that involves many parties to get to it.
Do you see that being taught anywhere in any of the academic programs right now?
There's been an increase in some focused seminars and short courses that different universities and academic sites have begun to offer, like the conference, the Association for Clinical Translational Statisticians. The most rigorous one is the Cystic Fibrosis Foundation actually runs a data safety monitoring board program with training provided through that agency for all new DSMB board members, whether or not you served on a DSMB with cystic fibrosis or any other disease area. When you start a new trial, you have a DSMB kickoff meeting in person for 1.5 to 2 days, where you get everyone there to discuss what is the role, purpose, and charge of the DSMB, as well as a really effective way of educating people.
Fortunately, the concept of DSMB is very well known already. So there are many conferences that sometimes a whole session on DSMB.
If technology can help you take the operational piece out, then you can actually start to extract insights because you have expertise and understand variability, distributions, and bias, and you can help design better trials and get better decisions from the DSMBs.
Very cool. And we're looking forward to all the smart analytics from Telperian to help
Yeah.
us with that. I want to thank you for the discussion, and I would like to transition to the Q&A right now. So everybody in the audience, feel free to turn on your camera. Thank you very much to the audience for coming and listening to us today and partaking. And thank you very much to the panel members and to the crew that helped. Thank you, everybody.